It's a pretty big responsibility to lead an organisation aiming to change the future for young women in the workplace. How do you balance supporting and advocating with campaigning? How do you tackle prejudice, bias and years of ingrained practice? How do you make yourself seen and heard in a noisy world? Well, today's guest is doing that and some. I'm Lee Griffith, a leadership strategy coach, and in the Leaders with Impact podcast, I'm proving it's possible to succeed without following outdated rules and old school stereotypes. I'm here to help you get clear on your personal strategy, implement some self-leadership, and connect with those you serve through your communication so that you can deliver improved organisational performance, engagement and reputation. If you want more leadership insights, sign up to my monthly newsletter at sundayskies.com. So I'm feeling totally in awe and inspired after talking with Claire Reindorp, Chief Executive of the Young Women's Trust. We talk about what it's like leading a small charity, leading as a feminist and leading to make change happen. There's a lot to unpack, so settle in. I'm delighted to welcome Claire Reindorp to the Leaders with Impact podcast. Thank you for coming on, Claire.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'm going to jump straight in with my first question, which I ask everyone, and that is, what does impactful leadership mean to you?
Oh, well, particularly in the context that I'm working in, where you're leading a charity, it is obviously achieving your organisational purpose and bringing together a team of people to bring out the absolute best of them so that together you can really go out and achieve your goals and make the difference. In our context, that people come to charities to work for a purpose, and they're full of that purpose, and their values are really in the job right from the beginning. So you've got a really big springboard there to achieve impact, probably easier in some ways than the impact job that some leaders have, because you have hearts and minds so much there at the beginning. And so it's pushing on an open door, I think, to bring that together to achieve your vision and ensure, in the context of charities, of course, that your vision is one that has come from the people that you're working with and for, so that it is actually not just what you think people need, but what actually is going to bring about the social change or the really good quality services or whatever it is that your charity is set up to achieve.
Say a little bit about your charity, just so we've got some context for where we're going to go in this conversation, because there's so many things I want to dive into, but I think without the context, it would be helpful.
Of course. Well, just the last couple of years, I've been working for Young Women's Trust as a chief exec. It's my first chief exec role. So I'm on a very steep learning curve. And we champion young women aged 18 to 30 who are on low pay or no pay. And our purpose is really to create a more equal world of work for those young women and raise their incomes, particularly young women on the lowest pay. And we do three things: really provide practical help, support for young women with their CVs, applications, free professional coaching. We carry out research so that we can really shine a spotlight on the realities of young women's lives in the workplace. And we bring together a 1,000-strong network of young women to support each other and campaign for workplace equality. And I'm sure later on in our chat, I have more of a chance to talk a little bit about our work and what people listening to this, might want to do to support it. It's an amazing charity, and we've been around since the 1860s in one form or another, which I love. I mean, in those early days, we were really about supporting women who were migrating to the cities in the Industrial Revolution to work in factories and workshops in terrible conditions and support them. But of course, many things have changed for women and young women in the workplace, but an awful lot hasn't. And we're focused on this income gap of 1/5 between young men and young women. Young women take home £4,000 less than young men each year still. And we know that's about, obviously, being stuck in low pay, part-time working, discrimination in the workplace. And we're here in the 21st century, still here to tackle those kind of challenges, working with young women. So it's a fabulous organisation.
Yeah, and really important causes and place in the kind of conversations that need to happen both in the workplace but more at a more societal level as well. So definitely we will be diving into some of these themes, but I want to take you back a little bit to, I suppose, what's shaped you as the person and the leader you are today. I know you've got a really strong background in the charity sector, so I'm wondering how you've kind of ended up in that place.
Yes. Well, I have become a charity sector lifer. I was, I'm in my 50s now. I was one of 4 kids. I was born in the East End. My dad at that point was a curate, and my mum was up to her eyeballs in childcare because I'm one of 4 children born within 6 years because I have an identical twin. And we didn't have much money, but we were very well loved and were brought up in an environment with very strong values. I think partly my dad was born in South Africa with a South African mum and came here when he was young, but had a very lifelong kind of commitment to anti-apartheid movement and anti-racism, and a strong, very politically active. And my mum, who came from a family that weren't at all sort of academic, but ended up doing a PhD, which took her to Uganda from the outskirts of Birmingham to Uganda. And it changed her life, that experience, and made her a lot of the person that she was, although she sort of died very, young, I think. She was an incredibly compassionate person, and she had a campaigning sort of spirit. And that left me with a strong sense of purpose around tackling inequality, and probably also with a very unhealthy work ethic. And I think that when I was in my early 20s, I was like a lot of young women in my early 20s. I was a bit lost for a while, and I worked in pubs and I worked in a care home, which I loved actually. But then I found a job as an administrator in a local charity called Home Start, which is still going on today. I think is a brilliant model in the voluntary sector. And I went from there to get to youth work, and I worked for the Refugee Council, ran their services in London. I worked for Peabody Housing Association doing supported housing, and then increasingly looking at bringing about change on housing estates in London to benefit children and young people. So I've sort of followed a path through the voluntary sector that took me to Young Women's Trust today, which enables me to carry on my, passion for tackling inequality and also my lifelong feminism, and working with young women is a real joy. I've got 2 young people at home, 11 and 13. They're also always a big motivation here about the world that they're coming into and what has and hasn't changed for them, compared to generations of women before.
And how do you think that's shaped working in the types of organisations you've worked in and now leading an organisation? How do you think that's shaped you as the leader that you show up today?
Well, I think there's a strong kind of compass, isn't there, around purpose, which I think I've said before. I think as a person and as a feminist, I think I some of my strengths of being very sort of authentic and showing up as me. I'm quite sort of low ego person, and not I don't love the limelight. I wasn't intending to be a chief exec. I got the job. I applied and was really shocked to get it. And I think I'm kind of growing into my sales sense of self as a chief exec. And I think what I really love as a leader is working with teams of people, and that sense of shared endeavour and drive for change, and seeing the difference that you're making, which in all my jobs in different ways, you're around the change that you are trying to make, whether that's providing good advice sessions to asylum seekers and refugees, working at the Refugee Council, or working out on estates and seeing what young people want and working together to achieve it. I love that. And that really shapes the leader that I am, or the leader that I'm learning to be, because there's such so I think a lot of your further, previous conversations with people on this podcast, it's very much an evolving thing, isn't it? Learning to be a leader.
You're never done.
You are absolutely never done. I feel like I am very much a learner driver. Taking home an organisation, as a chief exec, felt like coming home with a new baby, where you really feel like, oh wow, just because I've got this organisation attached to me, it doesn't know I'm still the same person that I was. A bit like when you become a parent and you learn on the job, and you need to be sort of honest about that, because that's how it really is, isn't it?
So how have you found it? I mean, you mentioned you've been there just over 2 years now, but you're still
Yeah.
Do you still classify yourself as the learner, the newbie in
Totally.
most? So how I suppose has it measured up the reality to what you perhaps thought it was going to be like being a chief exec?
Yes. Well, it is brilliant, but it's also really tough.
Yeah.
And I think, and it is the sort of continual learning curve. I did think somebody actually, a charity chief exec, a lovely woman, did say to me, "Oh, give it a couple of years, Claire. Don't think it's 6 months." Which I think there's that first 100 days, isn't it? And you're thinking, oh well, you make a plan and then you implement it, and it's a much longer process of learning. At least it is for me. And I think a key one for me is for small charities, and if any small charity chief execs are listening to this, they'll just be groaning with recognition of it, is what your scale of ambition is and what you can actually achieve with quite a small team, but with these big ambitions for change. And that means certain things for leadership, really about how you continually refine your strategy, reprioritize, check in on the bandwidth of your organisation and the people within it to deliver what we're all hoping to achieve. And of course, thinking about how much people come to the charity sector with their full whole selves, their hearts and their minds. Everybody does want to achieve an awful lot. So there is always that danger that you can topple over by being overly ambitious. And you've got to really look at that and be really kind of agile in the sense of like doing a program of work and then stopping and reviewing it and seeing what did we learn. And I think also for me, I'm leading Young Women's Trust to do more work on social change, because we've done a long history of supporting young women, practical support. But we also know that the system around them is not changing enough, and we're wanting to tackle, but in our case, workplace equality. And my background isn't in campaigning and social change in that way. So I think there's an uncomfortable thing for me about leading an organisation to do the thing I know least about. And that requires holding your nerve and being particularly humble. And all leadership is about managing uncertainty, isn't it? But we know where we want to get to, but how we get there and managing, all the bumps along the road does require quite a lot of strength and honesty. But I like more in the last couple of years than I think I've done in the previous 25. It's incredibly stimulating and a real kind of honour to do it. But it does really take you to places that you haven't been before. And when we went on a residential recently with some young women that we work with, and they're always so wise, not, I was about to say beyond their years, but there's a wisdom from being in your 20s and the freshness of it. You see the world. And one young woman, Hen, said to me, "Yeah, but Claire, everyone has to do it scared." I do think you have to do it scared in life. You have to know that it is uncomfortable. That discomfort is newness and growth and uncertainty and risk, but it is where change and impact happens. Yeah. And there's been times in my professional life when I have been in my comfort zone. I've needed to be. I've had small children, or I've dealing with family members who are really very unwell, or whatever else you've got. Sometimes in your life you are standing still, and sometimes you're running. Sometimes you're lying down, and all those things are okay, aren't they? You just got to know which one you're doing and marshal yourself around the challenge,
Yeah. It's interesting, as you were talking, I was reflecting on I suppose it's a bit of a stereotype, but this sense of confidence in women versus men in the workplace, and that men can look at a job description and go, well, I only meet 10% of it, but yeah, I'm going to get this job. And a woman can look at it and meet 95%, but really fixate on that 5% they can't and won't apply. And you saying that campaigning is a big part of the job and something you hadn't come across, and that's absolutely you having to step out of your comfort zone. What did you need to lean into to go, yes, I'm going to tackle that and it's going to be all right?
Yes. Well, I think some of it is the knowing that my values lead me to campaigning, because I don't because like some of the work we're doing with young women is offering them free professional coaching, and a lot of the thousands of young women that get coaching with us each year, obviously confidence is one of the issues that young women bring. And young women and girls were taught from a very early age that, being confident, being powerful, being, strong, all those things are not are not things that are generally taught to girls. We come with that sort of confidence. It's obviously a structural political issue. And I think if, as much as coaching can really help, I don't want to redefine a structural problem as an individual problem that just young women have to sort. So my values take me to that place of encouraging young women's trust and leading it to do more work on social change. But of course, that does create discomfort, as you say, for me as a leader, as someone who doesn't know how to do that well, and having to obviously recruit a team around me that has those strengths, give them plenty of space to do what they're really good at, find ways of supporting them. And I think sometimes you can feel a bit, inadequate, I guess, as a line manager to someone who you're wanting to support. You don't have that technical expertise to say, I can help you with that. But you can be alongside people and you can set the wider vision and ensure that, as I said before, given the challenges of being in a small charity, you have a kind of compassionate environment where everyone can experiment and we can learn and fail and try again and not know the answers, but still try and have enough clarity for people to know the next bit ahead. Yeah. I think that's what I'm learning, is attention.
And where do you get your support then, in the same way that you're providing that vision and that, helping to encourage and build the confidence of others who perhaps don't know where they're going? Where are you seeking that from?
Well, I mean, one of the great things about being a small charity chief exec I've discovered is other women chief execs are so supportive to each other. It's fantastic meeting them and all of us telling each other the things that we're worrying about, our horror stories, our successes, our disasters. There's a real honesty and camaraderie and allyship, and people, recommending things to each other and making suggestions, which is really super powerful and uplifting. I also have a great leadership team. I think that's the thing, a lot of trust and respect in the leadership team. And so it feels that we are, although, it's a team that's ever changing, recruitment is tough. And some, we've had members of the leadership team have been interims while we've been looking for permanent hires. There's that provides a lot of support. And it's not as isolating as some people say, or leadership is isolating. I've not necessarily found it so, but it certainly can feel relentless at times, because a bit like having a new baby, you can't put it down and walk away, and as I'm very, because it's my purpose, my passion that's led me to it, and my values, like kind of actually separating and like really switching off is not something I've been good at, and I know I need to get better at it, because that is giving yourself that time off and reflection time is really key to good leadership, and coming back with a fresh perspective each Monday morning.
So you've mentioned a couple of times your feminist principles, and I'm making an assumption that the Young Women's Trust is primarily female focused in terms of the workforce. I don't know whether it's...
Yeah, we have got a couple of very brave men working with us who are great, but absolutely, we're predominantly workforce of women.
So do you think that that's had a impact or a significance in the way that you've led here, maybe perhaps to other organisations you've worked in?
I certainly think it has a different organisational dynamic, and I think leading an organisation of women to achieve something for women and with young women obviously means particular things. I mean, especially as I've become older as a feminist and aspire to be more intersectional, and Young Women's Trust has brings together a lens of age and gender with class, race, disability. The need to kind of pay attention to your own power and privilege, where you have lived experience and where you really don't, is so important. And I read something at the beginning of my taking up the role here on anti-racism, and that really stayed with me. And one of them really was about traps that white feminists can fall into when they're leading organisations and trying to be intersectional. And one, I think, is that and I'm sure I'm guilty of this sometimes, is that if you're not someone who feels particularly confident and you're anxious, and that might be lots of leaders in truth, you can get quite preoccupied with your own internal world and how you feel, and not actually really acknowledge your own power and how your power operates in your organisation, because you don't see yourself as inside, you don't feel that powerful. And then you're not looking at your impact on an organisation. And I think the other thing that really struck a chord with me is that informality, and I am like a naturally informal leader, is also, you have to look out for the dangers of that, because you mustn't confuse informality with, it doesn't dissolve hierarchies, and it doesn't, the way that hierarchies can inhibit feedback and give you a very partial view of what people are really thinking and feeling in your organisation, that informality can obscure that. And so there's something to kind of watch. And I think the other thing that I'm learning is I also lead with positivity and energy. But if you want to pay attention to power and be an intersectional feminist, you've got to have the difficult conversations about how power is operating your organisation and how powerless people feel because of the discrimination they've faced in your organisation, in your organisation, and how those protected characteristics are playing out, and their experiences outside the workforce. And they're painful and hard conversations, and they can only happen if there's an organisational culture where you can say difficult things as well as the positive things. And I think I'm learning about that too. It's sort of like a lot of things in leadership is play to your strengths, but beware your strengths too, and how they might not be serving you and your organisation.
And how does that work in practice, I suppose? Like, is there a routine? Is it something is ingrained in you that you're always checking in, or are you having to be really intentional at certain points? Like, I'm fascinated how you take the theory of wanting to do that and into the practice.
Yes. Well, there's all sorts of things. I mean, like this is, like you're saying, this is an ongoing thing. I mean, there's practical things around how we get feedback from each other and how we try and find out how people are beyond the usual sort of staff surveys and one-to-ones and like staff meetings, and how much we use our face-to-face time as a hybrid organisation to really find out how people are doing, how you bring in expertise from outside your organisation to shine a bit of a light to what the dynamics are. We've been working with an anti-racist consultant last year, for example, and that we had some very important conversations there about how we've been racialised as white and not white, and that as a group of staff to talk about, office, culture is made up of all feelings, isn't it? Is the absolute other side of all your kind of your anti-racist policies or your EDI little action plan. It's the really messy stuff of how do people feel in your organisation, what conversations happen in the office, and being aware of like how that might be around some people being able to afford to talk about a holiday they're going on, and other people in the office not being able to afford that, or someone being able to afford to buy their first flat while someone else is struggling in crappy rented housing. And so what's the class and the kind of implications around what people are bringing, as well as that's the kind of day-to-day practices of inclusiveness and self-awareness. So I don't think I've got like all these things. There's no kind of easy answers, is there? But they're except continual self-awareness, sometimes doing things wrong, course correction, and because we are campaigning as an organisation for workplace equality, see that really, shines a spotlight on how we ourselves are doing things like pay equity, salary transparency, ensuring progression for young women in our organisation. So we have a continued work to do to live our values in that way, because these things are hard to bring about.
I mean, I'll admit I don't know much about feminist organisations or running boards as feminist boards, and I suppose encountered it a bit more often over the last couple of years of people that have been working in that way. And I was reading a book recently, and they were talking about running as a feminist organisation, but then realising that actually they become really static because they couldn't make a decision on stuff because they were trying to do it to the nth degree of what it means to be a really flat organisation. And that really struck me, that they then had to lean into some of those hierarchies and the way that they made decisions and held people to account, and some of the more traditional methods they did need to reintroduce. I'm interested what challenges you might have around some of that in your organisation.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are in some ways quite traditional. We have a senior leadership team, and I wouldn't say that we are being, radically, if that's what radical feminist leadership is, I don't think we're achieving that. But I do think that we are trying our best to live our values about equality in the workplace. And I think there are still things around that, like you say, around how decisions are made and needing to be clear what is up for consultation, what is where the decision-making power lies, and not misleading anyone that there are some decisions that you have to take that will be unpopular or uncomfortable, difficult, and that we have a leadership team taking those decisions. But we know that we want to, that this is a team sport, isn't it? Actually achieving your strategy, and in our case, bringing about fundamental change for young women. When we're a team of 26, 27, we've got a goal as big as that. We will only make any progress towards that if everyone in the organisation feels there's a true stake in the organisation, and that they can have their voice heard. And I know we have got more to do on that. And I think there are some more radical models out there. I'm reading, like I've been reading things about some think tanks that have gone down that route. And there's some real joys and sorrows along the way, isn't there? But I think there is a need to keep trying to reinvent organisational cultures, because it's so easy to fall into default ways of working. And for example, just a practical example of that, I mean, for years I've been recruiting staff and not sending questions in advance, asking people to come do presentations and tests and all these things. And now we have said, obviously, like many other organisations, so why are you doing that? Interviews isn't about catching people out. Send your questions in advance, be really transparent. Is it right to do tests? I mean, I have a neurodivergent daughter. That's an absolute nightmare for her. You think, what are you actually doing in your basic practices like that, which are potentially very exclusionary. And there was a default model there that I'd followed for a long time. And it doesn't need to be that way. So trying to stay alert to ways in which you might be part of the problem.
Yeah. It's a bit of an aside, but I'm also minded of whenever there are movements, whatever they are, you will have a contingent of people that do the whatabouts as a response. How do you tackle that as an organisation?
Well, I think, we are really driving forward with the evidence, what young women are saying about their own experiences, and the evidence that we have a brilliant team of peer researchers who are bringing the experiences of young women into the organisation, and we're publishing their research and doing our surveys, which is just showing, I think, the evidence speaks for itself about what is really happening for young women. And that doesn't mean that there's not lots of other challenges for other groups, but I think it's legitimate to really say, look, this is a challenge. This is young women who are not being able to achieve what they're able to achieve in the workplace, that are living in poverty. There's 1 million young women in this country living in low pay or no pay. They're having their lives circumscribed and limited, and it's not actually good for anybody. It's terrible for young women, but it's also not good for men. It often traps men in breadwinning roles, and it's dangerous, bad for the economy. And these kind of equality issues are actually they're not minority issues. So they're actually things that will drive fundamental social change that benefits us all. So I think and also, of course, it's talking to men and young men about the ways in which the perceptions of what it is, the expectations on them, is also damaging them. And good in good intersectional feminism brings all of that together and sees how we're all actually diminished, really, by our inability to really get the other side of some of these core issues. And the good news, I think, is that change is possible. Whether you're looking at race, disability, class, gender, that different countries are making more progress on some of these things. Some you see, in our case, you see some companies that are really tackling inequality in their workplace, leaders who are being really imaginative. So that we know change is possible, which is the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, because it doesn't need to be this way. And that the other side of the change is such an opportunity for everybody.
So you mentioned that you're almost 3 hats of the organisation. You've got the practical help, the research, you've got the campaigning. I know you do a lot of fundraising as well as an organisation. I'm interested how you manage personally to juggle all those hats and keep on top of the different agendas that you've got to keep on top of.
Yeah, well, of course, that goes right back to the things we were saying about one of the key challenges is about your ambition and how much you can do at once. And we just keep on learning that. I mean, we do, I think everyone in the organisation is very committed to keeping on supporting young women in the day-to-day, carrying on our research, because that does provide the evidence to the, and helps on that whataboutery stuff. And like, well, isn't this difficult for everyone? And the campaigning for change that we know will mean that we're not in another 150 years in the same position that we're in now. But it does require regular course corrections and challenge of each other. And what are we saying no to? And what are we saying yes to? And what are we saying we have to do later? And what have we got to put back? Because there's such a danger of spreading yourself very, very thinly, and, wide and thin is not going to make the difference. That's an everyday core challenge, I would say. But it is, compared to bigger organisations, perhaps it doesn't quite bite quite so hard, but it is the thing that's trying to be nimble and say to people, this is what we said we would do at the beginning of the year, but actually that's not realistic. Or in the case of like what's happening right now, the general election has been called, and that is our burning platform. So other plans need to go to one side. And I think leadership is a very different thing, isn't it, than perhaps it was maybe it was always like this. You obviously have to be very responsive to circumstances, but we are living in a world where change is happening exponentially, and you've got to be being responsive and being able to pivot on your strategy is absolutely a core skill, isn't it?
One of the things I've noticed about your organisation, which I really like, is that sense of collaboration and collegiacy, I suppose, with other organisations that have similar values, of fighting a similar fight, and not to down talk larger charities or larger organisations, but sometimes they can be it's about us and we're in this playground, and it doesn't feel like that with your charity and the stuff that you do and how you're promoting it. And I wonder how that's happened. Has that been intentional, or has it just been a kind of natural evolution?
Well, I'm glad you see that. I certainly think that we've been identifying that partnerships, are still a big priority for us to do more of, because, of course, small organisations on their own can only do so much, and that there's an ecosystem in the voluntary sector where we do really need to come together with a strong voice, whether you're a small charity or a large charity. And going into the general election, we're part of a fantastic coalition of women's organisations that are working under the hashtag SheVotes2024, to give us a quick plug.
Yeah.
And there is an awful lot of common values there, and if we're going to influence future government, and if we're going to influence, in our case, employers, we have to join up with organisations that share some of our agenda, because we kind of cross over charities that are working in the poverty area, and like employment, youth, feminism. We take in all those different sectors, and therefore partnering with others is so important. Otherwise we will duplicate. And I think that, if there's too much duplication, it's not only is obviously that inefficient and not good use of people's resources, but I think it also, in the minds of the public, in the end diminishes charities' credibility, because always there's so many of you doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's very, very important to get that right. And we keep needing to, I think, put energy into going out in partnership effectively with others.
And we've touched on the fact that we're in the midst of campaigning around the election, and I'm interested you've said that you've had to park some things so you can focus around that, but the role of being a leader in a charity during that election period, are you a partisan organisation, or do you have to try and have some balance in the way, or like, I'm just
absolutely well, as a charity you absolutely have to be politically non-partisan, and that is an expectation for all charities, and the Charity Commission holds us to account for that. So it is super important that we focus on the manifesto that young women have drawn up for an equal world of work. Again, quick plug, it's on our website. We'd love people to sign up to it and support it. But we are really wanting to, one, mobilise young women to vote for any party, but to step into their power, to feel confident their voice matters. We're working with young women to make sure they know how to vote and all the issues about voter ID and so on. And also then to question parties and question prospective MPs and candidates about their perspective on the issues that matter to young women on the manifesto. So, and then when, as has happened this week, parties are releasing their manifestos, then young women who are campaigning with us will be able to say, well, it's great to see this from that party, but we're looking for it for others. But it is really important that we are non-partisan and that the young women and the public can trust that we are here to deliver our kind of purpose as an organisation, which isn't a party political purpose. But nevertheless, it's a deeply political purpose, isn't it? Because it is about changing policies in Westminster, and it's also about changing workplace policies, but it's not party political in that way.
And how are you having to adapt to the need to be heard at this time at a point when there are so many other people also wanting to be heard on their kind of area?
Yeah, well, it's a crowded space and a busy time for everybody, isn't it? I think for us, building our digital skills and reaching new young women on Instagram and TikTok, which is where young women are designing our sort of social posts and things, of posting messages there to other young women and getting their engagement and getting feedback on what's landing with young women and what's making them feel like they're more encouraged to vote. I mean, one of the things that young women have been sharing with us is that obviously some young women, like many young people, are a bit disillusioned from politics and feel it's not from them. But there's also, for some of the young women campaigners, that sort of sense of, we don't really understand politics. Do we know enough? A little bit of embarrassment about that sense that it's sort of something very complicated that they can't access. So that is something I think really practical that we can offer. We're doing some campaign calls with young women to come and chat to other young women about what does it mean to vote and what is on their mind and what are their questions. There's like no silly questions, so that that sense that politics is for us, it is about us, it is what will change our lives in this country if we get it right, and make that expand the idea of who can be in that space.
And
it's exciting, yeah.
How do you detach, I suppose, your personal politics and thoughts perhaps on different things that are coming out with the aims that you're trying to achieve in the day-to-day job? Because it's hard. I know from my public sector background, there's things that I really wanted to say and couldn't say.
Yes, well, it's a disciplined process, that, isn't it? But at the end of the day, when we've got the manifesto from young women with their asks, and you see those asks in people's manifestos, or you don't, and then there's a chance to question people, say this is what we want to see. Of course, that at the moment there are some parties that are offering perhaps more to young women than others, but really it's in post-election, it will be then looking at the implementation of those things, and obviously like how much of that can really be achieved and how does it really land with young women. We all know, in the same way that I know that implementing a strategy is very different from drawing one up. Writing your manifesto is very different from being in power with very limited resource and the political pressures that you face. So it will be really important for us to offer that perspective to politicians around, let's say, for example, 0 hours contracts, that some people might say they need to be banned, and of course, when they're exploitative and they're not chosen by a worker, then they're not right. But some young women are saying in some circumstances that gives them choice and flexibility. But it does need to be their choice, not one based on the power dynamic or an exploitative employer. So there's the kind of detail about what the policies really look like that will change the lives of young women and make things better, not worse, and the unintended consequences of policy making. So I think that will be very important for us post-election. And key part our work with employers and spreading good practice. And, the young women that we are really most working with and for are those in low paying retail, care, hospitality, where they're often forgotten and where margins are often very tight and employment practices can be often a bit looser. And, Westminster can, in some senses, legislate for all they like, but with very little money and enforcement, it still is the case that we need to be carrying on researching what's really going on in workplaces. Many young women tell us they're still not getting the minimum wage they're entitled to. They're still not getting the same pay for equal work as young men. We're still finding astonishing facts that 15% of the managers that we've surveyed said they didn't think that women were suitable for senior management positions. Blatant discriminatory views that you think, makes you think you're in the 1950s are still really out there. And we want to continue to expose those to show, whilst some things are changing, there is this huge amount more to be done on race, as well as age and gender and class together. And that there's a lot of rightful energy about how to get women through that glass ceiling and C-suite, but we're really talking about the sticky floor that young women are trying to detach themselves from, where they're in really dead-end jobs, and make sure that they are a political priority, but also a priority for employers.
And you've perfectly segued into what I was going to ask next, actually, which was the sense of, particularly in larger organisations, there is that hierarchy. And so those at the top are focused on, as you say, maybe breaking people through the glass ceiling at the top. And they leave it to those further down in the organisation to manage what happens on the shop floor or however they see it. What is your message, I suppose, to people who are perhaps listening to this interview or at that C-suite level or at the higher ends of an organisation? Why do they need to start paying attention to this? What can they be doing when they go back into the office?
Well, I think, really good businesses know that this is just business sense, isn't it? Your pipeline. I hate calling young women not a pipeline, are they? But, that sense of where's your new talent going to come from? And that, savvy businesses are sorting out their early career offer and really thinking about how to bring young women up from that sort of broken rung on the bottom of the ladder, so that they have got. There's a really big report last year about women in the workplace and the real issues around that middle area of where are women going when they're trying to get into first, second line management. And that particularly the focus on first-line managers as either champions or gatekeepers in young women's worlds. So attention on line management. There was a big report out from CMI that said that 80% of line managers in this country are accidental line managers. They've had no training to be a manager. It might not be seen, management not be seen as a thing, but of course it is a thing, and it is a thing that makes companies great. For small businesses, these sort of elaborate training is obviously really hard, and the majority of people in this country working for small employers. So it is about the art of the possible and what you can do. Things like that help gender equality, putting salaries on your adverts, offering flexibility on your adverts makes good business sense. It will attract more candidates to you, not asking salary history questions so that women don't port their lower salary from previous jobs to the new job. Looking at how do your first line managers really have conversations with young women and all employees about their aspirations and their talent and help them move up through your organisation. And obviously things like how you practice your flexible working in reality, how you welcome women and carers back into the workforce after parental leave so you don't lose people. And we see that we support young women in the age of 18 to 30, that there's a big squeeze in their mid-20s. Many of young women come to us at that stage feeling like they've got stuck. And that is often, we know that, young women are doing better than young men, and they get more likely to get degrees at university, the more they're doing better at school. They are coming out of those systems with a sense of academic success, but that is simply not being translated into increased incomes. By the age of 30, that income gap is still very well established, regardless of whether you've had a degree or not, or how well you've done in school. It's not translating into greater success for young women in the workplace in terms of pay and progression. And the companies that are doing this well are gaining the benefits of that talent. So there's some low-hanging fruit. Some of this is tough to do, and some of it is things that you can start straight away and you can learn from others. And we are, really keen to keep momentum up on this. And I think I shall stop there.
No, you can carry on if there was something else you want to say.
No, that's enough.
So my final question, about I will want to get in a little bit around what you do and how people can get involved. So we'll come to that in a moment. But my final question is around the one piece of advice that you would give to aspiring, let's say, aspiring women leaders, young women who might listen to this and go, how do I get into your shoes? What's your advice?
Oh, I find that hard to give one piece of advice because everybody's journey is so different, isn't it? And what's maybe holding people back may be different. But I certainly think I have a coach and she says this sort of very well-known phrase, isn't it, really, about courage being a muscle that grows the more you use it. And I think that's really true. Having courage and doing things scared, being as kind to yourself whilst you're scared as possible. Yes, of course, what I would like to say is things like, have faith in yourself and have confidence, all those sorts of things. But actually, people can tell you that until you're blue in the face. It is really hard to make that a real truth that you can take into yourself, which is why I think you have to go forward with the uncertainty. Just like, I don't want to make too many analogies between leadership and parenting. They are not the same things. But if you wait until you feel ready to become a parent, you're never ready, are you? And I certainly will never feel ready to be a chief exec. I will just sort of live in the state of unreadiness and do the best I can in that context. And so I think it definitely gives you that insight that I think you can project onto other leaders, that they have certainty and confidence and they're different from you. But of course, behind the scenes, and that's what's lovely about the honest conversations I have with other charity chief execs, everyone's feeling those same uncertainties. And that same sense of are they worthy and can they do it? And you can use that potentially as a superpower to drive forward your leadership. So everybody has if I can do it, I think everyone's got a chief exec inside themselves, if that is what they want. But there's also different joys of being in different parts of an organisation. Is that I've actually really enjoyed my time working more in, I'm not sure I like the word frontline roles because it always makes it sound like you're in the army or in but in those kind of very practical roles. So it is about roles. It's a hands-on role. Yeah, it's deciding what you want at different points in your life, isn't it? But I'm certainly don't want to underestimate the privilege of having this opportunity to lead in this way and learn.
There's something you said there about the confidence, and I always say that actually those that are really confident bring complacency into the stuff that they do, and that actually that's, as you say, anything that's a power or a strength of yours can be overplayed and becomes a weakness, and I think that's the real danger. So lean into the fact that I don't know why I keep saying lean in today. That's not
well, I think it's true. It is true. You've got to. Yeah, I like the idea of leaning into anxiety and lack of confidence rather than leaning into like a kind of Sheryl Sandberg lean in. But I think that will be something I can take away from this conversation. I won't be complacent. Yeah. So I've got that benefit from the times when you like all the self-doubt. And I think the other thing is probably just important to reflect on as leader is how to make it fun, isn't it? Because this is a big part of your life. And how do you make a workplace fun, bring a bit of levity and not take yourself too seriously? Obviously, I am quite an earnest person, but it's just to say, look, you're not gonna save the world in like one 24-hour period, and you've got to step away and have a bit of fun and get out of your own way.
Yes, indeed. finally, I know firsthand the great work you do because I'm very privileged to be one of your volunteers, and I work on your look at young women's CVs, and I've loved seeing the breadth of experience and the variety of stuff that people do. But I know you're always looking for more people to get involved in all shapes and guises. So people listening to this, how can they help you and the Young Women's Trust?
Oh, thank you. Well, it's brilliant that you're one of our volunteers. And I mean, there's a couple of hundred volunteers that we're working with to provide advice and guidance to young women on their CVs and job applications. So if you're someone who's had hiring experience and you think you could give us an hour or so a month, we would love to hear from you. Of course, if you're listening to this as a young woman, just get in touch if you'd like free professional coaching or help with your CVs. You want to join our online community, you want to campaign with us. And if you're an ally, we really would love people to sign up to Young Women's Manifesto for an equal world of work and campaign. Spread the word. I'm also a charity chief exec that's always going to say yes to any fundraising support, donations. Do check us out. We're youngwomenstrust.org.
Brilliant. And people can find you on LinkedIn as well, can't they? So.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm Claire Reindorp on LinkedIn.
I will make sure we add all the links and everything on the show notes so that people can get in touch and support you. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've loved having this chat and I hope to speak again soon.
Thanks so much. That was a lovely conversation.
If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and let me know what you thought on LinkedIn. You can find me at Lee Griffith. I'll be back with the next episode in 2 weeks' time. So in the meantime, sign up to my newsletter at sundayskies.com for monthly insights on how else you can lead with impact. Until next time.